everybody, it's Romania Black, and we're on episode 10 of ORB on the movements of the earth. I'm so excited. I look forward to this episode every week. I look forward to this series every single week I record. It is like a soul cleanse, and somehow I have found ways to relate what is going on around us to this series that takes place in 1400s, probably Poland. So, who knew? Who knew history, right? I have a couple comments before we're going to start, but I want to say that I'm really excited to see what's going to happen now that Count Piast has died. What are we going to do now? I'm sure in no way, shape, or form the organization is going to, I worry about Yolenta a little bit. I really do, because I think the Count was very kind to her and treated her more like an equal, kind of more like Badeni in a way, except without the liability. So I'm a little bit worried for her because I think she's going to get taken advantage of. And I think that her one support that she really had in the organization there at the school, which was Piast, is gone now. So I don't know how that's going to go. But I'm curious to see if she stays with the organization, if she lingers more towards Oczy and Badeni. We'll see where that leads us. But anyway, I've got a couple comments for episode 7 and one for episode 8 that I want to talk about before we dive in. Luminist says for episode 7, Badeni and Oczy posting the problems on the board. This is basically the Middle Ages version of our subreddit. I love that. I love that. I'm like, yes, that basically is what it is. It's a subreddit. We're just doing it. How technology just changes the very similar ways we've communicated over time and just does it in a different format. Yeah, right. Say second verse, same as the first. Isn't that the phrase? Moomin for episode 7 says, I genuinely feel concern for, we're talking about people persecuting Yolenta and everything. As a country, we are so insecure and afraid that we hang our hats on things that we think are not changing. And this is talking about the U.S. by and large. A story as old as time, though it is applicable elsewhere. The danger is that they live for being raptured while ignoring problems of the real world. It's pure escapism. I'm sure it was worse being a peasant in Poland in the 1400s, so not much has changed. The peasants are just better dressed now with new gizmos to distract them. I love that line, new gizmos to distract them, which I want to bring up. I'm recording this a few weeks before you probably will see it on Patreon or YouTube, but back on September 23rd, 2025, I was getting ready for bed, and my friend sent me, because I have a TikTok, but I just posted on it years ago. I haven't posted on it recently, but my friends usually will send me TikToks. And they sent me one on September 23rd being like, you still here? And I was like, what? And apparently there was this rapture talk that was prevalent on TikTok. And it was basically people thought, one person started this, a pastor or religious figure on social media started this saying that he had a vision. And in his vision, Jesus came to him saying he was going to be raptured and come on September 23rd, which if you have read the Bible, which I have read the Bible, and I'm reading the Bible currently, if you have read it, it is said within the Bible that no one will know when the actual rapture, it's not even called the rapture in the Bible. The rapture is like an idiom that refers to, it's like a layman's term that refers to the act of Jesus coming back, or of people on the earth meeting God, and of all these wonderful things happening. And by wonderful, I mean not wonderful things happening at the second coming of Christ. But the point is, the Bible makes it explicit that no one will ever know when that is. You will never know. It will just happen. Not even Jesus knows, apparently. Just God knows, and that's it. If you believe in that, that's what it is. But for some reason, this man, what does a 2,000-year-old document know? And this guy said it was going to be on September 23rd. And so there's been a lot of videos that I've watched, because it's kind of, I don't use TikTok. I don't get on it a lot, but I like watching YouTube compilations of people talking about TikTok. So it's, modalities are weird. But there is a YouTube persona that is Salem Tovar. I really like her. I love the way that she talks, and I love her accent. And she just is funny and talks about various things I find interesting that are outside of anime and donghua. But she had a compilation of all these rapture talks, and the way that this relates to ORB is that within there was a clip of this woman from TikTok. She was talking about the rapture, and she was addressing her audience, and she said, "Are you ready to leave this hellhole?" referring to Earth. And in that moment, watching that today, I thought, oh, just like ORB, 1400s Poland, we're still back in that same mindset that people who, in this case, in her case, having religious psychosis, allegedly, from my opinion, but it's not changed. It's still like this psychosis that can come from misinterpreting or misunderstanding or getting riled up or fear-mongering, etc. And I felt so sad in that moment because I was like, this world is beautiful. I was like, you need to watch ORB. It's essentially what I wanted to tell this woman. Be like, get off TikTok and go watch ORB on the movements of the earth, because I'm like, this earth is beautiful. Hellhole. Like, yeah, it's not, your life may be filled with hardships, but the world around you is gorgeous. Go touch grass. Like, oh my gosh. I was all worked up. And that is one of the reasons I decided to watch episode 10 today. Because I was like, we need to talk about this. So yeah, so Moomin, thank you for that comment. And then finally, for episode 8, Jav Gamer says, Badeni is such an interestingly written character. I can't think of another protagonist off the top of my head with such a mix of admirable and unadmirable traits. In terms of admirability, he's incredibly smart, is open to new ways of thinking, searches for the truth, and treats Yolenta as an intellectual equal, despite her being a woman and a child. Yolenta's only 14, so the fact that Badeni, this man in at least his 20s, is like, yeah, she's cool. I'm like, she's a kid. That's really awesome. However, he also looks down on the poor, is very antisocial, nothing wrong with that, and has no problems with using people for his own ends. He's also so self-absorbed and egotistical, it's a wonder his head hasn't gotten trapped in his own ass. Well, he has a special haircut that prevents that from happening. But anyway, most of the time, when protagonists have some kind of flaw, it's something like them being timid or rash or distrusting or something else that's largely internally based and is about self-reflection. I think this is so as not to turn the audience off from them as a protagonist. But with him, it's solely externally based with how he treats the people around him. There is like a respect with Badeni, though. I feel like he's one of those people that, like, you don't like him, but you respect him. But since he's a fictional character, I like him. If I met him in real life, I probably wouldn't like him. But in terms of a fictional character, I'm like, oh, he's cool. When I imagine people reading anime or reading a series or a piece of media and they're like, oh, he's an asshole, but like a lovable asshole. And sometimes that doesn't work. Sometimes you're like, no, they're just a jerk. And here it works. So kudos to the writer for Badeni's character. And yet he still turns out to be likable. And I think a large part of that is the strange form of humility he has. Despite literally thinking God made him to be special and leave a mark on the world, he never thinks that he has all the answers and is entirely focused on bettering himself through knowledge. He doesn't think he's some perfect being with all the answers already. Also, his goal being one of seeking truth helps him in endearing him to the audience. Can't snap today, but you're getting all the snaps because I agree 100% with that. I think that makes Badeni's character so fascinating and fun, is that he's egotistical and arrogant, but he has the knowledge and is it arrogance when he has the know-how to back it up, or is it confidence? It's like, I do love his character, even as dangerous as he is, because he's dangerous. Like, he could get Yolenta in a lot of trouble or Aksha in a lot of trouble, because he's not going to be, as far as we know right now, he's not going to turn himself in or put himself in danger. He's going to throw everybody else under the bus, as far as we know now. Now, depending on how long he lives, if he lives throughout the whole series, or how long he makes it through this series, or what happens to Aksha and Yolenta, that might be a different story. We'll see if that changes, but I'm very excited to see where that goes. But yeah, super cool. So yeah, I really enjoy Aksha's character. I've talked for 10 minutes. We need to get started with this new episode, don't we? I think we do. Anyway, I'm excited to get started. I hope you all are as well. We are going to start ORB on the movements of the earth, episode 10. And we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1. And let's do it to it. Well, this episode was much more of a setup episode than I thought it was going to be. When we got the OP starting out, I was like, oh, that's usually a bad sign. That's usually a sign that shit's about to go down. But what I actually think is going to happen is next week, shit's going to go down because Nowak has entered the chat again officially, and I'm like, with his new press sleeves ready to bloody him up. And I'm a little bit concerned because the moment we saw the one guy with the one priest that had found Count Piast's diary, his journal, his work, that got me nervous because theoretically, if we're looking at this, let's think for a hot second where we're getting talks about the Inquisition, which, the Inquisition, yep, not getting good fun vibes from that. We also have a priest who is kind of, has a bad impression of Badeni to begin with, and now has been denied from Badeni, and has the book of Count Piast. And my fear is that in that book there is going to be the names of Badeni and Oczy and worst, Jolenta. Now, the question would be, because did Count Piast, did he reveal, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe he didn't mention any of them. Maybe he wasn't like, I got this feeling of dread that Piast wrote in his book, being like, these three individuals, they challenged me and they challenged my theories to prove heliocentrism, and here are their names, just so you know, so if I die, you'll know who to prove me false. But I don't know. He might have not put their names in it at all. And maybe Badeni will be like, 'twas me, but he may not have put the names in at all, because then if you think about it, why would he have put the names in? Why would he give credit to someone else? Because it was his research. And maybe the one priest will do nothing with the book. And maybe it would kind of be a bitch move if Badeni found out that if Badeni was like, I really want to see that diary of Piast, because I know he was working on it. And I want to see his research, and I need that to finish up my theory, just to put a little bow on everything. And he went to the deacon and was like, could I have that book? And the deacon's like, no. It's like, So, like, he doesn't want to give the knowledge to Badeni. That would be a fun turnaround. But I don't know. I don't know what's going to end up happening with the book. The deacon has it. So, whatever he's going to do with it, I guess we're going to find out. Nowak has been sent to teach the new young recruits how to be an Inquisition. So we're going to talk about that. That's going to be interesting. I think it would be the irony of all ironies if his daughter was one of the people that they found as a heretic. I don't want that for Jolenta. I don't want that for Nowak, because that's his daughter. But, I could see this show. This show is not afraid to not have sympathy. So we'll just have to see where that goes, right? Anyway, so let's talk about this episode. This episode being called Truth. I really I thought this was going to get a lot more intense than it did, but it's just a setup episode. But there's lots of things being set up that I'm like, okay. So this mangaka loves to see somebody right next to candlelight, especially if they're blonde and looking out towards a window with the sky in the distance. I was getting raffle flashbacks, and I was like, oh, Badeni, I don't want you to be long for this world, but I don't know. We'll see. So then we have poor Oczy. Oczy being, I wanted to see if there's any symbolism of the house he's in. He's in this shack. He has this candle and he's writing his little book and he's using natural sunlight. But I feel like the house itself, with all of the boards missing from it, I feel like it is symbolic of Oczy slowly like letting down his walls that he's built up through religion around himself, like letting himself be more open, letting himself be kind, and him just kind of also letting in the beautiful world. Like we've seen Oczy has shut out the world for so long because of his religious psychosis that he's had. And so now it's almost like he's accepting the beauty of the world and letting it in, which is something that he's denied himself for the longest time. So that's fun. Fun times with that. But yeah, so this episode. So then we have Badeni showing back up and he's like, I'm going to use your shack and this barn for research because I don't want to work at the church. He's like, I'm doing research that they're going to get mad at. And then this whole scene is maybe my favorite scene in the episode, where he's like, what's this? And he's like, oh, I've been learning to read and write. Yolanta taught me. And then he's like, what? The look of astonishment and disbelief on Badeni's face, where he's like, what? What? Is just like, he almost looks innocent. He looks like a cat that saw a cucumber. He just looks like the most bewildered, and it's almost adorable. He's like, unbelievable. How could Yolanta do such a thing? Teaching the written word to someone of your class. Which at first, here's the thing about Badeni. Badeni opens up a big old can of worms about discussion, and it's so fascinating. It's so fascinating because at first, you know, you want to have the knee-jerk reaction of Badeni, don't be classist. Like, you want to have that knee-jerk reaction, right? Because Badeni's whole thing is that he believes that in order to have special privilege, you have to be gifted by God with knowledge, as well as basically the environment. I mean, we're going to talk about this, but the way he describes it, because Aksha's like, well, what's wrong with me learning to read and write? And he says, you don't get it. He's like, it's a good thing that most people can't read and write. He's like, reading and writing are special skills, which, if we're going to connect to what Yolanta said, it's the idea that they are a miracle. The idea that they are a miracle, that they are special, right? And it is special that reading and writing exists, right? He says they're a special skill. To leave words behind is a heavy responsibility. So here's where we get this. He says words, and more importantly, the legacy of them, are a heavy, responsibility. And there's no arguing that with Badeni, because, I mean, that is very true. History is what people will go back to. It's a big responsibility. It requires certain natural gifts and a minimum level of education. So you have to have natural gifts. So basically, you have to be smart. And you have to have a minimum education. We're going to talk about the faults in Badeni's logic here shortly. We're going to talk about the faults in it, don't worry. But he does make a good point. He says if the written word were available to everyone, unreliable information would flood the world. So if everyone had access, or rather, the ability to leave behind words, then you would have a flood of misinformation. That doesn't happen in our real world right now, does it? Of course not. It's not like that we have, ways of disseminating information where it can't be determined what's real and what's made up. It's just not, that's not been going on for 20 plus years with the advent of the internet. That's not been at all. What? And he's like, it would be a dire situation indeed. Besides, what use do you have for reading and writing? So before we get into Aksha's reply, to put on here, Badeni makes a very tangible point that is very applicable in our modern society right now, and also is very interesting in comparison to the church. I could see why Badeni would get behind the church in a way, because if you're functioning through that logic, you have a document, the Bible, that has not changed in 2,000 years. It has been the sole text, or in this case, it's been, 1,400 years? It's been the sole text. It does not change. It's believed to be irrefutable and treated as factual. And it's not like everyone's writing, which is ironic because we've talked about it in other episodes, I believe, where there are different versions of the Bible, different translations. So technically, there are different versions of it out here. If Badeni was being a purist about it, you'd only want to look at the initial language, which would be Hebrew, right? That it would be written in. So my minute semantics. But anyway, so Badeni is, you can understand why he believes in the church, because it is definitely an environment that is it's exclusive. It's exclusive. It only favors those who are privileged, who have been deemed worthy in their eyes by God to attain that information. And Badeni, of course, is like, well, that's the way it should be, because otherwise, if everybody can read and write, well, then people will write all sorts of crazy things and say the rapture's happening on September 23rd, 2025 with no basis of credit or understanding of why that would be. And, it'd be just kind of crazy, right? So you can understand from that logic, it makes sense. And there's a part of me that kind of wants to agree with Badeni because of how much misinformation gets spread in our world. But I don't think it's really the fact of who can read and write that determines that now. Now it's more who has access to the technologies that spread that information. You can read, you can write, and I think those skills are important for anyone to have, because that is, your culture will implode. Your culture will cease to exist if the people within it cannot read or write, because oral tradition will only take you so far, because you need the legacy left behind. If Latin wasn't left behind as a written language, it's a dead language now. No one speaks it. So we wouldn't have any knowledge of it if the person couldn't have read and write and put it down. And the error in Badeni's logic, of course, is these factors here. So, first of all, the natural gifts of if you are smart. Well, hell, people can be born smart and be indoctrinated into, smart people can be manipulated. It's not just dumb people. Smart people can be manipulated if the right person does it in the right way, or if they're conditioned through a specific environment in a certain way or shape or form. Yeah, they can be manipulated. So what is your definition of smart? Your natural gifts. I mean, for Badeni, he's smart. So of course he's like, well, of course I'm naturally gifted. I apply to this, so that works. But it's the second one that is the kicker, because it's like, and they have to have a minimum education. Well, that's just based on circumstance and privilege. If Aksha had the right upbringing, he could have been sent to a school and learned just the same as Badeni. And then that would have granted him the worthiness to read and write. So the classism part of it, I get where Badeni is coming from and why he believes the way that he does. And in our own personal, experience in the real world, that makes sense. But if the shoe were on a different foot and Badeni hadn't had the privilege of getting the education that he did, would he think the same thing? Would he feel the same way? Badeni is such a proud person. If he had not gotten the chance and the opportunities that he did to be in the monastery where he had access to those documents to do that, would he think the same way? It's kind of a chicken before the egg question. You don't really know. But it's ironic in a way that he's like, well, only those with education get the chance to do that. And he's so exclusionary about it, when that could easily turn upon him, right? If you put those types of parameters around who has access to knowledge and who has access to truth, well, what is stopping the church from telling Badeni, well, we've had a change of heart, and our new leader has decided that he doesn't really deem you worthy of looking at the documents anymore, and it's just what God would want, so you don't get access to that. Sorry. Would he change his tune? Is he going to change his tune? I don't know. Because I feel like with this new leader who's introduced at the end of this episode, who seems very, very rigid and by the book and has a different agenda than Count Piast, I feel as if he is not going to be as much for intellectual curiosity and seeking the truth. He already thinks he knows the truth, and that's dangerous. And I think that him and Badeni might clash a wee bit. And I'm going to be curious to see if Badeni is going to eat those words or not. I don't know. Or not. It's just such a fascinating conversation because we're dealing with it right now. And there are people on the internet that write that I'm like, you should. And that's such a thing. There's a part of you that wants to say you should not be able to read and write. You shouldn't be able to write. And I would never want to take that freedom away. I'm torn between the two camps where I'm like Aksha. I believe it's beautiful that Aksha gets access to reading and writing now, and that opens up a whole world of freedom for him. And I think anyone should be born with the same opportunity as someone else. But then in the same note, I get where Badeni is coming from, saying, well, we're not all born with the same opportunity. So people who get access, and we see it happen in this episode. We see it we see it outlined in this episode, what Badeni is talking about, where he's like, but not everyone's born with equality in their lives. That's the unfortunate thing. So we need to make sure that the right information and the correct information is left. But what Badeni is suggesting is not feasible. It's not sustainable. You cannot control what information, you're not a god. You cannot control what information gets disseminated. And Badeni's like, well, only the truth needs to be recorded and left as legacy. But we just had an episode last week where the count and the count before him were proven wrong. So they didn't even leave behind truths. They just left behind stepping stones to get to the next level of it. So, and then you have a church who dictates what is written and what is left out and excluded. So even by Badeni's own logic, it's still not happening the way that he wants it to happen. So it's like what he's asking for is impossible because of humanity itself in its existence and how it is as a humanity. So, but I love it. I love the way he frames it. Like I never thought of it that way. And I was like, no, that makes sense. That makes sense. And then Aksha's like, well, I'm thinking of writing a book. And Badeni is so disgusted. He's so like, what do you mean you're going to write a book? You, a peasant, write a book? Aksha's like, it's going to be a piece of fictional work. And he's like, fiction? I feel like this is, if you get a philosophy scholar and a creative writing major in the same room arguing over which of their texts has more value, this is the conversation you're going to get of Badeni versus Aksha, who is doing like the fiction versus nonfiction. Like, I freaking love it. It's hilarious. He's like, well, it's more like a diary. It's just for myself. And Badeni's just like, I don't even know what to do with this. He's like, I won't reveal my name. And to Badeni, that's even more. I almost felt like Badeni was even more disturbed by the fact that Aksha wasn't going to include his name. Because Badeni is like, no, I am going to leave my mark in history. I'm going to have my name plastered over this heliocentric theorem. And I will be the one to get the credit. And so for Aksha to say, it's just an anonymous diary. I'm just writing for fun. And it's just going to be about my life and my journey. And, I'm not going to include my name to get credit for it. That concept, Badeni does not even know what to do with. He doesn't even know how to process it. He's like, excuse me? God, I love that exchange. And then he's like, well, yeah. And I like the Aksha's just looking at him like, is this okay? It's like a dog looking at a cat. I want to write about the work we've done so far. And he's like, what? But of course I can't write anything technical. Badeni is horrified in this moment. And it's like Badeni.exe has stopped functioning. He needs to be rebooted. Him throwing up outside is the reboot. He's like, it would be more like a story. He's like, hold on a second. I love it. And he's like, there's a lot I want to say. But first off, he's like, why would you do that? And he's like, what? Why would someone like you, who could never read or write, want to write about these past few months and risk putting someone on our trail? And that was interesting for him to say that. For him to be like, we're supposed to be doing this in secret. Why would you want to endanger us? And Aksha's like, well, I didn't put my name in it. I'm not what am I writing that's going to endanger us? There's no names being mentioned. I'm like, Badeni, you are the most conspicuous person in this story right now. You're walking around with giant blonde hair, multiple face scars, and a damn eye patch in a deacon's outfit. You are the most conspicuous person and easy to point out person in the story. If anybody's going to put somebody on the trail of what they're doing, it's you. I was like, yeah, Aksha just looks like a peasant. A handsome, well-meaning peasant, but a peasant. He looks like a mob character. I'm like, Badeni, you are the most noticeable person. But I like that he's like, why would you want to write? And he's like, oh, well, that's, he's like, never mind. He's like, I don't want to hear your smutty fan fiction. Not now. Even if you manage to, I'll burn the pages. He's so cruel. He's just so blunt about it. He's like, I'll burn the pages, so whatever. He's like, I need you to leave. And Aksha's like, okay, it's my house, but okay. I love their dynamic so much. It's so damn funny to me. Anyway, so then we go to the church where we have the one deacon and the kids are like, why do rainbows occur? I went to look this up. So rainbows. I feel like I know it's an optical phenomenon, right? It's refraction. That's the word I was looking for. I was like, it's refraction, internal reflection and dispersion of light in water droplets, resulting in a continuous spectrum of light that appears across the sky. Da, 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 da. Rainbows can be full circles, but usually you only see an arc. And so it talks about the different colors. I like that we have Newton's first and later colors, and then a modern interpretation, which is red, orange, yellow, green, cyan, and then blue, and then violet, which is interesting. Originally, Newton had said it was blue, and then blue and indigo, and now the modern interpretation is cyan and blue, which is interesting. But yeah, basically when sunlight encounters a raindrop, a part of the light is reflected and the rest enters the raindrop, and then it's refracted at the surface. It hits the back of the raindrop and some is reflected off the back. When the internally reflected light reaches the surface again, once more, some is internally reflected and some is refracted as it exits the drop. So it says the light at the back of the raindrop does not undergo total internal reflection and most of the light emerges from the back. It does not exist in one particular location, but they can be seen depending on how the particle observer's viewpoint as droplets of light illuminated by the sun. And it talks about cones and axial symmetry. There's a mathematical equation for it. Of course there's a mathematical equation for it. Why wouldn't there be? Snell's law. Snell explaining rainbows and the double rainbow. A double rainbow across the sky. So yeah, interesting. I like the idea of rainbows under moonlight. That's really cool. But yeah, there's a whole article about it. Nice. The classical Greek scholar Aristotle was the first to devote serious attention to rainbows. Of course you were, Aristotle. Of course you were. And so yeah, there's all sorts of, in book 1 of the Naturalis Quaestionists, Seneca the Younger discusses various theories of the formation of rainbows extensively, including those of Aristotle. He notices that rainbows appear always opposite the sun and that they appear in water sprayed by a rower. Fun times. I like that. Also, I guess you could kind of use rainbows to show the movement of the earth. Could you not? Could you not? So in the Bible, rainbows are a sign by, I liked how they explained it in the episode itself, where he's like, oh, well, it's God's way of congratulating us for withstanding the rain. All I could think about was Neon Genesis Evangelion. Congratulations. Love tying that in with this show. But the kids are like, but why does it have so many colors? Why are there so many colors in a rainbow? And then this guy's like, kids asking the darndest questions. So why do rainbows have 7 colors? Which also, it's interesting because 7 is a very symbolic number in Christianity. So that's interesting. So New Scientist back in 2021 was asked, why are there 7 colors in a rainbow? And it said, our perception of a rainbow is colored, pun intended, by our expectation that there are 7 colors. In reality, There aren't 7 distinct bands, but multiple colors blending and shading into one another. Around 1665, Isaac Newton performed experiments with a prism, producing a spectrum in which he identified 7 colors. Think Pink Floyd. Prior to that, the spectrum was thought to have been 5 colors, which again, 5 is also a symbolic number. For example, in his book, Experiments and Considerations Teaching Colors, Robert Boyle described the spectrum he produced with a prism as denoting the 5 consecutions of the colors red, yellow, green, blue, and purple. This book was published in 1664, just before Newton started his experiments. Scandal! However, the number 7 had long been considered mystical, denoting perfection and completeness. I always think that 7 is kind of a crazy number because you can't really divide it by anything. And in math terms, it always was just this. 7 is just a weird number. It's just a weird number. I don't know if I wouldn't describe it as perfection, but I don't know. Anyway, the sort of mysticism fascinated Newton as much as science, so he thought there must be 7 colors in the rainbow. He added orange and split purple into indigo and violet. It's said that Isaac Newton only perceived 5 colors in the rainbow and added 2 more because the number 7 had the mystical significance. We have 7 days of the week, 7 natural notes in most Western music, and in Newton's time, only 7 planets had been discovered. Love it! Love that connection! While this was simply one of Newton's mystical beliefs, others included alchemy and the Philosopher's Stone, which could turn base metals into gold. It's become part of a cultural inheritance. The retina has cones with 3 opsin pigments that are sensitive to different color bands, peaking in orangish red, green, and deep blue. However, the retina color information is encoded into red versus green, yellow versus blue channels for transmission to the optic cortex. Hence, the 4 basic colors of visual psychology are red, yellow, green, and blue. Does that explain why in the game Sorry, that those are the main colors? Or in some board games, those are the essential colors? Interesting. Cyan looks different from blue because both green and blue cones are firing in that band, so it appears brighter. Similarly, orange is towards the yellowish part of the red band, where green cones are still firing strongly. Owing to the retinal encoding, the band we perceive as yellow is very narrow, whereas the red band is very broad. Violet appears a reddish due to that encoding. We only have 3 receptors of color 3 color receptors in our retinas. These respond to red, green, and blue light. If 2 of the receptors are activated at the same time, we see 3 more colors: yellow, cyan, and magenta. These are also used in color printers. And the last one isn't a rainbow color. If all 3 receptors are activated, we see white. Our computer and TV screens use the same primary colors as our eyes. People often get confused by being told at school that there are 3 primary colors that are yellow, red, and blue. Actually, these artistic colors are, from a physics perspective, the secondary colors of yellow, cyan, an artist blue, and magenta, an artist red. Don't be adding physics to my color wheel. Don't be changing up my color wheel. No. The difference is your eyes in a TV screen start with no light, and you gradually build up to white, whereas your printer starts with white paper, and so as you add ink, you start to subtract colors from the white. I love that. I love it. That actually makes a lot of sense about the printers. We're learning so much today through ORB. But obviously that's a lot. That's a lot to talk to these kids about. And this guy's like, I don't know. So he goes and asks Badeni about it. Now, Badeni, who just feels comfortable passing out from, lack of sleep, bless his heart. Also, I think he's just doing it to troll everybody. I think maybe he just likes the floor. Badeni has a very weird, I will say, I don't know if I should call it weird, but he has a tie to pain and pleasure because him sleeping on the floor, he's kind of in the same position where his eye was burned with the wax. So it's like, you would think he wouldn't want to be in that position because it would remind him of pain, but he seems okay with that. And then when he feels he's solved the heliocentric theory, he's like smashing his hand against the side of the building until it like bleeds, and he's okay with that. Badeni is honestly one of the most fascinating characters in anime I've seen in a while, and I really like him. I also like that he gives the deacon an answer in exchange for pen and ink. I like that Badeni does not give off any information for free. He always exchanges it for something else. And so then he basically interprets and quotes a philosopher on his reasoning. And then the deacon's like, have you read Epicurus's work? Now, Badeni, I do believe Badeni when he says he read it to prove his faith. This is kind of the scary thing about this episode. We know as the audience that Badeni is very faithful. He really does genuinely believe in the church, and he believes in God, and he believes in the system when it's working for him. And he believes in it, and he believes that he is meant to help add to the system, right? So I feel for him because I feel like it would be all too easy. This episode gives like a really creepy, ominous foreshadowing of people talking behind Badeni's back about his scar and making some assumptions about why are you reading Lucretius's and this other guy's work. And Badeni's like, I'm doing it to further my own faith and to inform myself. But Badeni is one person and the church is an institution. Ironically, because Jesus was one person, you know how that goes. But ironically, Badeni, I worry for him in the future because I feel like the church could very much decide that he's a threat and spin what he has done and what he says to make him be labeled as a heretic. I'm worried about that. I worry for him because I feel like people that just blindly follow this one institution's leader without question, and Badeni's just one person, the numbers are stacking against him slowly but surely, and I get a little bit worried about that. And then you have this guy who's like, well, I joined the monastery because I wanted to read his work. He's like, but I never got the chance to, though. He says, of course, my interest stems from a desire to help the church. And what's interesting about that is that this deacon kind of positions himself saying, like, I'm like you. He's like, the deacon says, well, I'm like you, Badeni, and I want to read this work because I want it to inform my faith like it did for you. And the crazy thing is, Badeni goes, well, that's nice. I'm not giving it to you. Badeni is not an equal opportunist at all. He's like, I got the opportunity and I was chosen. God selected me to read it, so kudos to me. But I'm not helping you. And it's so, the biggest difference between, like, if it was Aksha that was there instead of Badeni, Aksha would be like, I'll help you find it. Not Badeni. He's like, no. He's like, sorry. He's like, so many learned men quote from him. And it said his poems are inspiring. I feel like the moment he said only learned men are allowed to read it, Badeni's brain went, but you weren't chosen to read it. So that means you're not learned enough. And that means you're not special enough. And you are going to be exactly the type of person that you're going to be the type of person that I'm worried about will spread misinformation. And who ends up getting Count Piast's book? This guy. Now, of course, I'm assuming the church and the organization know what Count Piast has been working on all these years. I assume they've got that vault. They've got all those documents. Anybody can go in and read them as long as you get permission. So I'm assuming people know. It's not like he's been keeping it a secret all this time. I'm going to be curious to see what this deacon does with that information. What we're going to do with that. I got a bad feeling, basically. And he's like, you should know I have no interest in sharing knowledge. When commoners seek knowledge, it only leads to tragedy. Now, Badeni also has very bad bedside manner. Him and Count Piast did not get along great because Badeni was not good with his words. He definitely showed arrogance through that. And him calling this deacon to his face, being like, well, you're a commoner, you're not worthy of it. It's better off if you don't get to read it. Comes off a little bit. Doesn't come off great, right? Furthermore, an ordinary person without the proper qualifications would not be able to have it. And at first the guy's mad. He's like, Badeni's attitude is intolerable. He's like, is he calling me an ordinary person? He's far too prejudiced. He's like, everyone has a purpose. But then he stops and says, but if I look at it that way, I may disapprove, but Badeni has a purpose as well. My role is to aid the villagers in their faith. And then we cut to this very symbolic scene where he has two beams of light streaming down upon him, which is crazy. He's like, that's right. And then he says, that's right. What does he say about Lucretius? Because I love that beam of light that was streaming there. He says, why would I need the knowledge of a pagan like Lucretius now? Why should I want? And then that's when the people like interrupt and they're like, sir, we're supposed to be having a sermon. You're just kind of sitting there in the light of truth very awkwardly, sir. He's like, you work so hard for us, so it's okay. So then this one shepherd guy, this townsfolk who got his information off of Facebook, like repeats, how did Badeni got the scar on his face? And he turns out to be right, so that's interesting. He's like, I've been wondering about these scars. I thought that Badeni got the scars as exchange for knowledge. I thought that's why he got them. Now, I guess the question would be for us to ask, did Badeni tell everyone the truth? Did Badeni get these scars from a friend who stole his work and took his credit? Did he do that? Did he kill that man? Or did he make this up to just give an excuse rather than say that he exchanged, the scars? He doesn't want to give the trade secrets away and how he got all this knowledge. So he just says, from that. So instead they say his close friend also attended the same school that he did. They performed a joint research project and shared information. I love everybody says, so Badeni had friends, huh? Well, not anymore, because one day the friend stole credit for his research. But the surprising part is his friend was enraged and challenged him to a duel. That part's interesting. That part is the part of the story that made me kind of question it. Because he said one day the friend stole credit for his research. Which, you know what? Maybe if Yolenta had explained what happened between her and Colby, Badeni would relate to her and kind of understand where she's coming from and kind of, connect with her that way. The other thing was, if the friend stole the research credit, why'd he challenge him to a duel later on? Part of that story doesn't seem to make sense, so I wondered if Badeni just made it up. But apparently not. That's what he's telling everybody. The duel ended with him killing the close friend. And I thought in that moment that he sounded a lot like Nowak in that moment, that he's not afraid. Like both Nowak and Badeni have a connection to the church and a connection to their faith, but they're not afraid to get their hands dirty if it means saving their skins. I don't know. Maybe the friend took credit for the work and turned it in, and then they found out that the work was going to get them in trouble, so he tried to blame Badeni on it. And they're like, you mean a killer became a clergyman? Well, Nowak, a mercenary, became, the leader of the Inquisition, so the church will overlook it if they have a logical reason to join. I felt like that also tied to a lot of things and covers a manner of sins where, look, in a lot of ways, you could argue that there are organizations in our world right now who, if you just bend the knee, no matter what you've done in the past, if you just bend the knee and swear fealty, we'll forgive you. It's okay. As long as you're kissing our ass and doing our business, we'll let you in. Sure. That doesn't happen in real life. Doesn't happen now. Right? So that part was like, yep. In either case, it's a frightening story. Make sure Badeni keeps to himself. So the guy goes and confronts him and says, I heard about your scar. And Badeni's like, yep, sure is. He's like, that must have been painful. He says, I suppose we were close after all. He's like, why, after experiencing such a tragedy, would you still engage in research or scholarship? He says, because I don't want to discard the potential that God provides us. He's like, I'm still looking at it. Thanks to that, I could be even more present at the moment of historical significance. He's like, well, even so, your uncontrollable curiosity and unnecessary thirst for knowledge are without limit. One day it will become its own purpose and lead you to immoral behavior. He's like, bitch, I'm already there. He's like, isn't the world already full of immoral behavior? He's like, look, I'm just, he's like, Grabowski. I love it, like, Grabowski. What do you think is unnecessary to change such a world? And he's like, it's truth. I like that Badeni is like, look, I know the world's messed up, but the only thing that will help make it better is discovering the truth and making sure the truth is out there and that people know it and they're not misinformed. He's like, so that's what I'm doing. That's my quest, right? So it's so interesting. I love Badeni's character in this. I love it. It also might explain why Badeni is maybe afraid of Aksha being able to read and write. I wonder if he's afraid that Aksha, not that Aksha would do this, because Aksha's like, I'm not going to put my name on anything that we do, but I wonder if there's a tiny sliver of Badeni that's afraid Aksha would steal credit for something that he's been working on, and then he'd be like, well, you don't even have an education. You just learned to read and write from a 14-year-old. Why would you take credit? Like, I wonder if there's a tiny part of Badeni that's afraid of that. Like just a tiny little part of him that just has to go that way because of what's happened to him in the past, allegedly. Maybe we'll see. But yeah. So then we have the in-cart. So then we have the intermission. He's like, the truth, huh? And that's why it should only be handled by those who are qualified to do so. Then again, I'm not interested in doing things for the world's sake. But he's like, I'm doing this for my own glory, so have fun with that. I don't know. And maybe if Count Piast's work hadn't been published, would this deacon take credit for it? I don't know. He goes there and the library's closed, and that's when he finds the book. So, and at first, he's like, as he's leaving and he finds the book, he's just like, well, I'm not sorry I came all this way. And he's touching grass, enjoying nature. And that's when he finds the diary. So I don't know what we're going to get with that. I don't know where that's going. Meanwhile, Badeni is like, I'm trying to perfect this, but it's not working. I love the idea that he uses the necklace to create the elliptical, and he uses the necklace on the nails. That part was so good. I love that. The callback to Raffle by the candlelight, looking out the window when he was in prison. The parallels with that are so good. The very ominous, tower of shadows that Aksha is under as he's reading his little book. He's like, here's your daily bread. Here's your scone, peasant. He's like, Count Piast has gone to heaven. But he's like, cool, let's pray for him. Thoughts and prayers for Count Piast. He's like, they're restructuring the organization, and so Jolenta is busy. I wonder if that's why Novak is there as well, because he knows his daughter's in that building and they're restructuring it. And maybe my theory, my headcanon, is that Piast got Jolenta into the school. And so now that he's gone, Novak is like, I want to make sure my daughter's okay. So that's why I'm here now leading this. It seems she was destined to pull away from our research. Honestly, I'm getting a little bit more and more nervous for Badeni and Aksha. A little bit more nervous. And I think that Badeni knows that they could be in some deep shit soon. So he's like, okay, Count Piast, who was supporting our endeavors, is dead. The rest of the organization might not approve of anything we're doing. Jolenta is not involved with us, so that's good, but we could both be tried as heretics. Here, dig a tunnel. When he's like, here's some bread, and now I'm putting in a request. He's like, start digging from the barn to the church. We might need an escape path just in case. And he's like, oh, sure. I like that he just says dig a tunnel. That's going to take so long. But okay, Aksha has nothing better to do. It felt like I said in the reaction, the Great British Baking Show, where they do a technical challenge. And on that show, sometimes they get recipes for the technical challenge. But sometimes it just says, bake a cake. And from scratch, they're supposed to know how to do it. I don't know how those bakers do it. I don't know how they were just like, yeah, I know exactly what to do. And I'm like, I would have panicked and just crawled under the table and stared at the oven. But Aksha gets a little bit bold and says, in return for doing the work, I have a request. And I like that Badeni's like, I'm in a bad mood. why are you asking me for anything? And he's like, can you give me extra bread? And Badeni's like, you're just going to give it to the peasants. You want more for the beggars, don't you? It won't bring you closer to heaven. And Aksha's like, I'm just being nice. I find that so interesting. Because what's funny about it is if you think about it, it's saying that it's not going to bring you closer to heaven. You could interpret that as Badeni saying he doesn't believe that there is a heaven that they're going towards, because wouldn't an act of kindness do that? But I don't know. The episode, I've been waiting for the episode description to pop back up for this one. It says, Aksha tells Badeni that he is learning to read and write. Later, Badeni claims that knowledge should be held by a select few and that bothers a fellow monk. I don't get good vibes. So he goes back to writing and he figures everything out. He's like, these things don't match his records. What am I getting wrong? He's like, he assumed the geometric model was true, but the records, and then he sees the necklace. Yep. And so there he's like, if I apply and draw the lines from the fixed stars to Sun and Mars, if I pick the date when Mars was observed from Earth and I compare it to 1.88 years later, the orbit of Mars, and that's when he realizes it. And after he has his revelation, he goes out and throws up because that, matches with the OP and everything. And then him punching the side of the building till his hand bleeds. I'm like, do you have to write with that hand, sir? It's your right hand. And he says, dear Lord, I may have it. I love that shot. That might be the thumbnail, is him with his hands in prayer against the moonlight with the heliocentric model. If I continue with this method and create a polished version of it. Then he sees Aksha's little book. And he's like, what would he be writing about? How strange. He gives charity despite not being rich. He writes despite not being educated. I really don't understand peasants. Which I think Aksha's one of the most pure characters in the whole damn show. And I'd be like, if anybody was getting to heaven, it would probably be Aksha. I really think it would be. But anyway, so he looks at the book and then he gets his candle, or he gets his little light out. I like does he write in the book or does he sit there and just read it by candlelight? I thought maybe he lit a candle, but he's just reading it by candlelight. Instead, he goes to the beggar and says he's going to give him money in exchange for doing something. He's like, what I want is up here. I wonder what information Badeni wants from the beggars. I'm very curious, what knowledge does he want and seek from them? Interesting. I wonder. Or if there's some truth or knowledge about the city that Aksha has stumbled across from gossiping with the people in town that Badeni wants to know about. He gives him more bread. But he says, keep working hard on the tunnel. And as he's doing this, we don't know exactly how much time passes during all of this, because he's still using his, I love he uses his little monocle to write down everything. And Aksha's giving out all the bread to everybody because he's an angel lamb. And damn, they must have had a long time to be writing and working on this, because it would take a long time to dig the tunnel. But also, look at how much Badeni has on the table at 19 minutes and 22 seconds in. There's novels worth. Our dude has been writing a lot. So who knows how much time has passed. And Aksha writes on the stump. I like Aksha writing out in nature on the stump about everything. It just feels so perfect for his character, to come to this moment where he appreciates the beauty and he's writing out in nature. And then you have Badeni in front of the candle that's representing knowledge and truth as he's looking through the books. I love it. And he's like, oh, you're here usually in the barn. He's like, I've finished it. You can have the barn back. I finished the heliocentric theory. Okay. Now what do we do with it? That's the question. Are you making a spare copy to put into the stone chest? Because I'd make more than one copy if I were you, because they're probably going to burn one if they find it. So then we have the church. We have all these new monks that have shown up. They all look like they've been freshly shaved heads. They all look like European similarities. They all look pretty similar. And he's like, to tell the truth, I'm nervous. The one guy that looks like Chilchuck from Dungeon Meshi is nervous. The other guy that looks like a stoner surfer, he is not. And then the bishops arrived. This bishop has a very distinct look. From the back, he looks like Excalibur from Soul Eater if he was in human form. And from the front, he doesn't look that much different than that. So he's like, my dear brothers, with his black whiskers and white hair, from this day on, you will serve as inquisitors. So inquisitors, fun times. We have the Polish Inquisition, which, talk about this. The Polish Inquisition was an ecclesiastical institution established in the 13th century to combat heretics. Permanent structures of the Inquisition in Polish territories were established in the first half of the 14th century and played a subordinate role to episcopal tribunals, which were combating heretics in Poland in the mid-13th century. The final end of the existence of these tribunals came with Reformation and the victory of the idea of religious tolerance in Poland. In the second half of the 16th century, we're not getting religious tolerance anytime soon in this show. Uh-oh. So yeah, let's go to the 14th century, since 1318. Pope John the 22nd appointed the Dominican Peregrine of Opole and the Franciscan Mikolajaj Hospodajnik as inquisitors for the dioceses of Wrocław and Krakow. just slaughtered that Polish, just murdered that language right here on the dance floor. 9 years later, John the 22nd issued further regulations granting the Polish provincial superior of the Dominicans the authority to appoint inquisitors throughout the entire Polish province and called on the Polish king to support the inquisitors. This regulation, confirmed by Pope Eugene IV in 1432, became the basis for the functioning of the Papal Inquisition Office in Poland. In the 14th century, the activities of Wycliffe and John Hus caused unrest in academic circles in Europe. What else have we got here? After the Council of Constance, where John Hus was burned at the stake in 1415 and Jerome of Prague in 1416, the Polish took steps against the spread of their ideas in Poland and sought royal support in this regard. Interesting. Yeah, Inquisitors just doesn't have that little warm fuzzy feeling to it. Not fun times. Lots of inquisitioning, executions, trials. If NOAC's involved, I don't think it's going to end well, but you'll serve as inquisitors. So basically we're making a bunch of some small mini NOACs is what it sounds like. He's like, before you begin, there's something I'd like to say concerning the importance of your position. This monologue was chilling. Because of where I live in the United States and how much of this seemed to connect to now. So let's go back and look at that, where he says, several hundred years ago, the fall of Western Rome plunged the world into disorder. Chaos and violence ruled, authority was gained and lost, and there was nothing to unite a divided humankind. People of all types lost what was dear to them. And in the midst of that turmoil, the one ray of hope came from us, the church. Now, I want to back up from that, because he's saying basically Rome was just disillusioned in a state of chaos and disorder, and we, the church, through our kindness and understanding of what the people needed, came in and saved everyone. Now, granted, I went to ushistory.org, which is a U.S. website, and thus not perhaps the most accurate resource that I could find, but this was short, sweet, and to the point. The U.S. History website talks about the fall of the Roman Empire, and I want to read this in comparison to what I just told you. See if you can notice a difference in the story there, because it says the invading army which was talked about in a previous section of this article, reached the outskirts of Rome, which had been left totally undefended. In 410 CE, the Visigoths, led by Alaric, breached the walls of Rome and sacked the capital of the Roman Empire. The Visigoths looted, burned, and pillaged their way through the city, leaving a wake of destruction wherever they went. The plundering continued for 3 days. For the first time in nearly a millennium, the city of Rome was in the hands of someone other than the Romans. This was the first time that the city of Rome was sacked, but by no means the last. One of the many factors that contributed to the fall of the Roman Empire was the rise of a new religion, Christianity. The Christian religion, which was monotheistic, ran counter to the traditional Roman religion, which was theistic, which meant many gods. At different times, the Romans persecuted the Christians because of their beliefs, which were popular among the poor. In 313 CE, Roman Emperor Constantine the Great ended all persecution and declared toleration for Christianity. Later that century, Christianity became the official state religion of the empire. This drastic change in policy spread this relatively new religion to every corner of the empire. By approving Christianity, the Roman state directly undermined its religious traditions. Finally, by this time, Romans considered their emperor a god, but the Christian belief in one god who was not the emperor, weakened the authority and credibility of the emperor. Constantine enacted another change to help accelerate the fall of the Roman Empire. In 330 CE, he split the empire into two parts, the western half centered in Rome and the eastern half centered in Constantinople, which was a city he named after himself. The Western Empire spoke Latin and was Roman Catholic. The Eastern Empire spoke Greek and worshipped under the Eastern Orthodox branch of the Christian Church. Over time, the East thrived while the West declined. In fact, after the western part of the Roman Empire fell, the eastern half continued to exist as the Byzantine Empire for hundreds of years. Therefore, the fall of Rome really refers only to the fall of the western half of the empire. Other fundamental problems contributed to the fall. In economically ailing West, a decrease in agricultural production led to higher food prices. The western half of the empire had a trade deficit with the eastern half. The West purchased luxury goods from the East but had nothing to offer in exchange. To make up for the lack of money, the government began producing more coins with less silver content. This led to inflation. Finally, piracy and attacks from Germanic tribes disrupted the flow of trade, especially in the West. There were political and military difficulties as well. It didn't help matters that political amateurs were in control of Rome in the years leading up to its fall. Army generals dominated the emperorship, and corruption was rampant. Over time, the military was transformed into a mercenary army with no real loyalty to Rome. As money grew tight, the government hired the cheaper and less reliable Germanic soldiers to fight in Roman armies. By the end, these armies were defending Rome against their fellow Germanic tribesmen. Under these circumstances, the sack of Rome came as no surprise. I like this final section as the header Goth Rockers. Wave after wave of Germanic barbarian tribes swept through the Roman Empire. Groups such as the Visigoths, Vandals, Angles, Saxons, Franks, and Ostrogoths and Lombards took turns ravaging the empire, eventually carving out areas in which to settle down. The Angles and the Saxons produced and populated the British Isles, and the Franks ended up in France. In 476 CE, Romulus, the last of the Roman empires in the West, was overthrown by a Germanic leader who became the first barbarian to rule in Rome. The order that the Roman Empire had brought to Western Europe for 1,000 years was no more. So that all is very intriguing and creepy to me, because the church is suggesting in the scene here that, you know, because Rome was in such disarray, it's the church that saved Rome. But the article that I just read to y'all kind of suggests that the religion itself was kind of one of the reasons why the empire fell. Now, is that to say that it wouldn't have fell otherwise? Well, no. It very well could have. But to say that the church saved Rome when in fact it contributed to its decline and its eventual separation and fall is... This is brain rot. I know. I was waiting till someone, you probably caught it, but I can't help it. My students have been talking about brain rot today. But it's interesting because then he says, we spread culture and morality throughout society and brought love and salvation to everyday life. The church binds people together. And this article about the fall of Rome and this talk about it reminds me a lot. And keep in mind, I am a Christian myself. I'm a Christian myself, but I think about now in America where there is a lot of political division. And in my country, there is a lot of push by one party to accept Christianity as a national religion. And as much of a Christian as I am, I do believe in the democracy and freedom of my country. If somebody next to me doesn't want to believe in what I believe in, that's fine. Good on you. Settle that up later, I guess. And when your time comes, that's your business, but it's not my business. So this idea here that they're like, we made this national religion and we're binding people together, but at the same time, we're also excluding people. We're also hurting people that don't believe in us. Sounds a little contradictory. And then the same thing is kind of happening in my country where people who are like, say that they're righteous Christians and yet are excluding people based on the color of their skin or their sexuality or who they want to love. I'm like, it brings a lot of questions to play. And he says, you might think no one could complain about such wonderful efforts. But then he says, but surprisingly some do. This is where I got really chilled. They are none other than the pagans and the heretics. Having lost their faith, they only find meaning in destruction. Which is funny because this article about the history of the fall of the Roman Empire talks about how Christianity was once, people were persecuted because of it. And obviously the people who were persecuted of it would want to fight back. That's human. That's natural. But what's interesting is that this speech given by this new bishop for their organization, the rhetoric he's using is very similar to the rhetoric being used in my own country talking about political division, where, you can get on the news and it doesn't really matter what side, but there are people on either side saying, well, this person only means destruction, and the people that they associate with only mean destruction. And these, if you're not this religion, you only mean destruction. You've lost your faith, and thus you're a heathen and all this. And I'm like, this guy's speech was starting to get really scary because I was like, oh, I've heard these exact same things now, hundreds of years later. They speak misguidedly of freedom, break down morality and ethics. But the thing about that is, freedom, the way that it's described, you have Badeni who believes in this organization and this structure where he's like, no, you have to have the structure. There has to be the hierarchy. And in Badeni's mind, freedom is based upon privilege. It's based upon a moral structure. It's based upon ethics. It's based upon the things he's talking about here. And then you have Aksha who's like, well, why can't anybody read and write? That's freedom. And also we've talked about in previous episodes that the idea of the church is, in fact, it is a structure of authority. It's a way of controlling. It's a way of keeping people under your thumb. The churches are run by men. They're run by humans. Humans are flawed. They are not infallible. And so that all comes to bear in this discussion that he gives. They have abandoned salvation and hope, and they've pulled people apart. That speech in itself, when you have Raffle, Hubert, the heretics, like their actions, Aksha's actions, Grass's actions have pulled people together. They've pulled people together. They've done the exact opposite of that. And I hear that rhetoric so much in my day-to-day of how this one group of people, they just destroy and they pull people apart, and we're this group that believes in love and acceptance, and those people are evil. And I'm like, well, you can't believe in love and acceptance and then immediately exclude an entire group of people. That's not how that works, in my personal, humble opinion. But he says all of us together must save the heretics. That's terrifying. That's terrifying. They are victims who have been led astray by the devil. And when their lives end, their souls will descend to hell. Nothing could be worse. I feel like the one shorter guy is really annoyed. I don't know if he's annoyed by this speech or if he's moved by this speech or if he's like, his emotions throughout it are a little bit unreadable. He seems like he's biting the inside of his cheek, like he's trying not to get like make too much of a hubbub about it. So I'm curious. But what's insane is that as this bishop is like, these people are misguided and have been led by the devil, then I'm sorry, but Jesus's answer would be, so let's love them and show tolerance and acceptance to them and show them what great people we are. And instead he's like, we should probably burn them. I was like, that's essentially what he's saying. He's like, we're gonna punish them and then they'll change their minds. And I was like, yes, because unless you're a masochist like Badeni, who has this insane, inhuman amount of self-restraint and has channeled pain into a reward for knowledge, unless you're that insane person, which Badeni is like the only one, a human is not going to react to, thank you for punishing me. I've seen the errors of my ways. Thank you for hurting me. Now I'll change. Humans don't normally function that way. I hope you will guide the heretics in the right direction. Those of us alive today have never seen the world in its former state of madness. That's something that's rhetorically used as well, is when people refer to a past they didn't exist in and say, well, back in these days, this is how it was done back then. And so thus, we can only imagine the atrocities. And so we just have to put ourselves in those shoes. I'm like, you can't do that. You weren't there. You don't know. Why are you trying to do that? But I see this rhetoric used. He's like, that is exactly why we cannot let such an age fall upon us again. That is another rhetorical strategy that people will use to manipulate others, is that they will say, well, we can't go back to the way things were before. Like, I see a lot of boomers make that logic. And I'm like, or it'll either go two ways. It's either we need to make things go back to the way they once were when things were all sunshine and Andy Griffith and Peach Keen, or we need to avoid the past that was not good. And I'm like, well, they both exist simultaneously. The past was amazing for some people who had the privilege and were living life on the hog, and the past was terrible for other people who were oppressed. So you can't say we're going back to the good version without acknowledging that you would also be going back to the bad version. It just depends on what type of person you are and where you are in your privilege. So I love the symbolism of him in this light, like this angel, like freaking Lucifer. And then all of these bishops, all these little mini monks in the dark, like they don't know what he knows. It's scary. For our families, the future, and the faithful. I love the alliteration. The rhetoric of this is chilling. Chilling. You are needed. And honestly, that you are needed and through your work, like this bishop is a master rhetorician of manipulation because he is directly saying, you're doing this. You're involved. You are special. You are included. You are privileged. So he's like, you're going to do my dirty work, but look how special you are in doing it. Isn't that great? You look at the salvation you're going to be. Like, there's so much rhetoric there. I'm counting on you. And then the one guy's like, I think I took this job too lightly, but we can't be complaining. We're going to put our hearts and souls into it. So Nowak has Bill and Ted on their excellent adventure, training them to basically get rid of heretics. That's terrifying. That's terrifying. So this episode functions as, sorry I went on a bunch of tangents this episode, but there's so much week to week that ties this series to my own existence. And I'm like, well, awesome. So there is an aspect about this episode that talks about a generational cycle. So we had Raffle and we had Hubert and his heliocentric theorem, and it was passed down to Raffle, and now Raffle is passed down to Badeni, and now Badeni is like, it ends with me. So we'll see if that actually happens, right? We'll see if that happens. And then now you have Novak that is about to pass on a cycle of inquisition and violence to these two new guys. So I don't know. I don't know if we saw these new guys in the OP. Have we seen them in the OP? I want to go back and see if we've noticed them in the OP. I don't know. Although now we've had Badeni, we've had Hubert, we've had this one guy with the eyes. I don't think we've seen him yet. Maybe there's Raffle. There's this other guy with the helmet on. Was that supposed to be Aksha? And then there's Novak. Interesting. I want to see. Okay, we see the Damien. He was the one guy that was with Novak, but he's not there anymore. Raffle's so innocent and precious. I want to go back and see. Yeah, and then we had Aksha dropping the necklace. Silly Aksha, don't do that again. And then the globe that is there. And then we've got Badeni. I'm very curious if we're going to see, I don't know, all the lights going out around Yolenta, I'm a little worried about. We don't know these guys in the white. We don't know who they are. We've seen somebody here with their hair up. We don't know who they are either. Okay, so yeah, we do see the two of them. They're guarding the doors. So we do see the two of them in the OP briefly. So I don't know how relevant they're going to be in this. But they are in the OP, so interesting. Interesting. Okay. I guess we'll see. But yeah, we do see Yolenta holding someone's hands, so we'll see that. And we do see a guy with like black hair and a missing eye. I don't know. And then Hubert's self, love him. So I've talked for a long time about this episode, but this episode was really good. There was a lot to pick apart about it. I'm still kind of reeling from it, and I'm terrified for next week because I think this is all set up for some really bad stuff to go down, but we'll see. Maybe not. We're already at episode 10. What's the worst that could happen? Anyway, I hope y'all are excited about next week. I'm excited to know your thoughts down below. Sorry for going on a mini wiki tangent, but this series brings it out. So in any case, I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back very soon with more Orb on the movements of the earth. Bye.